So we can have everybody's attention. We're going to go ahead and get started. Everybody can find a seat. All right. Welcome. We've got a great crowd. Can everybody hear me out there okay? All right. I'll try to talk loud. My name is Ben Robinson. I'm the Director of Wildlife for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Mr. Gabe Jenkins is our Deputy Commissioner walking across here. Gabe's going to open us up with a few remarks. I'll be facilitating the meeting, so we'll let him say a few words, and then I'll jump in and kind of go through the agenda and the flow of the meeting for the evening. So, Gabe, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming tonight and coming out and talking with us this evening. Just a couple things I want to point out before we jump into it. A handful of housekeeping items. So first off, anybody needs to use the restroom, straight out the back doors. Women's is on the right. Men's is on the left-hand side on the other side of the auditorium. So feel free to get up and go. Let's see, there was something else I was going to mention. Also, if you didn't get a chance to sign in, we're going to be passing around a clipboard to get your name, number, and just a way for us to communicate with you and to correspond with you, and appreciate you coming tonight. And then lastly, as far as updates, tonight's event is going to be filmed, and so we're planning to film the entire thing, and then tomorrow we will upload it to the Department of Fish and Wildlife's YouTube page, so to be able to go back and review it. Any of the questions and things that we cover, if you have questions, so it'll be there, and for you to go back and stream that if you would like. We have agendas. We're going to try to stick to that agenda the best that we can. We have a handful of thend that we want to present to you guys, to talk to you about, and then open it up to question and answers at the end. Also on that agenda is a list of contact information as far as our department, some of our leaders within the agency, both with staff and then our commission members for the 3rd and 4th districts, which encompasses these counties. So you have that if you want to reach out, correspond with us or them. You're going to see a lot of different info tonight about ways to interact with us. That's the one thing we want to say. We're here. We want to provide information to you, talk to you, and have a chance to talk and answer any questions that you might have. And then lastly, before I step off and kick it over to Ben, I do want to take a moment to recognize, if many of y'all have probably heard, but if you've not, we lost one of our game wardens last Friday, Officer Tex Bailey, and he died in a training. And like I said, he passed away last Friday. His funeral is tomorrow. And if you don't mind, just join me in a moment of silence in memory of him. All right, thank you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Ben Robinson, and he will get us kicked off for the night.
All right, thank you, Gabe. Again, welcome everybody. Did everybody have a chance to pick up an agenda when they came in, or got one handy? Again, that's what we're gonna stick to, and then we're on a pretty tight schedule, but we want to make sure that we give everybody a chance to say a few words at the end and have some Q&A time. So we're going to try to stick to this agenda as best we can, and I'll try to help facilitate that. One of the first things we're going to do is a fun little exercise for some crowd participation. Tommy, if you can pull up the QR code for us to get us started. I don't know how fun this is going to be if the QR code doesn't show up. There we go. All right, is everybody familiar with the QR code? So basically, get your phone out and turn your camera on, and if you hover over this barcode, you'll probably see a little yellow box or something pop up on your phone. Certainly don't have to participate if you don't want to, but we've got a series of questions that we're going to ask, and it's kind of fun because it's real time. You'll answer the question, and it'll sum up all of the data, and you'll get to see what everybody in the room's thinking as we go along throughout the night. So take a second to do that if you'd like to participate with us. All right, everybody having luck up there? Is it not picking it up? Phone service is not working? Okay. It worked earlier when we tested, so we will move on to the next exercise if that's not going to work. Is it working for you? Okay. Okay. I'm getting some people working, some not. It probably depends on the carrier you have. Let's go forward with it, folks, that it does work. If it's not working on your phone, you can play along with us. So go right ahead, Tommy. First question, pretty simple. What's your gender? You'll see in the top corner, it shows how many people participating. So we've got 79 people, looks like, logged in. All right, Tommy, go ahead and close that one out. All right, we've got almost 80 room. It's male, about 20% female. All right, if you don't care to put your age in there for us. What about my mic? There we go. All right, Tommy, you can close that one out. All right, Tommy, let's go to the next one. All right, how did you hear about our meeting tonight? You can select all that apply there. You can watch up at the top. That shows the responses coming in. So all right, Tommy, let's go ahead and close that one out. All right, we've got a good word of mouth. Word of mouth and social media. All right. Next one, Tommy. Okay, did you deer hunt within the last 5 years? And that could be anywhere. That could be in Kentucky. That could be preferably in Kentucky.
I've been good. Did we work out at 2 o'clock in the morning, Kentucky time? No. I would be my
All right. 85% of our audience has deer hunted within the last 5 years. That's great. Okay, which of the following counties do you normally deer hunt in?
What? Oh, no, you are not.
Got a lot of Breckinridge County hunters. That's good. All right. Before this deer season, do you typically deer hunt over bait? close that one out. Okay, about a 60-40 split there. Okay, just a few questions about chronic wasting disease, and then we're going to get into a lot of answers on these questions here real soon in one of our presentations. But chronic wasting disease, is it caused by a bacteria, a parasite, a virus, or a misfolded protein?
The government.
All right, almost 61% of folks said misfolded protein, and that is correct. You may hear the word prion a lot tonight. That is a misfolded protein, and again, we'll learn more about that as the night goes on. So that's good. True or false? Deer can recover from chronic wasting.
It's not real.
All right, very good. 91% said false. That is correct. So that's something to remember for the night. CWD is 100% fatal. If deer contract CWD, they are going to eventually succumb to the disease.
Life is dead.
True or false? A deer that has CWD can look healthy. True, that is correct. Many times they do. It can take a couple of years before deer really go clinical and start showing the signs of CWD. And this will be our last one for now. True or false? CWD outbreaks typically occur in late summer or early fall when water levels are low. All right, so about divided on this one. Actually, the answer is false. A lot of times, and we'll go over this as well in one of our presentations, but there's a lot of confusion between CWD and HD, or hemorrhagic disease, or blue tongue, you might hear folks say. Deer can recover from HD. It actually is contracted through a biting fly. Oftentimes, that happens in really dry periods. When deer are going down looking for water, they congregate around these areas, they pick up the fly. But that's not always fatal. They can actually build resistance and antibodies to HD or blue tongue. CWD can happen at any time of the year, and again, it's always fatal. So, really appreciate you playing along with us. We've got a few more questions as the night goes on, but right now, to keep things on track, we're going to jump right into our first presentation, and that's going to be an overview of chronic wasting disease, really following up on some of these questions and getting into more detail with the good Dr. Chrissy Casey, our veterinarian for the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
All right. I'm usually like a talker and a walker, so I'm going to try to stay right here. I'm going to talk about chronic wasting disease. Let me find the clicker. Sweet. Oh, wrong way. Okay. What is the disease? As we mentioned before, it's caused by a prion. It affects the white-tailed deer, so it's the whole cervid family, including white-tailed deer, mule deer, black-tailed deer, elk, moose. and caribou. And there's some other non-native cervid species that it can infect. As Ben mentioned, it's always fatal. There is no cure, and the animal will eventually succumb to the disease. Oh, wrong way. Should turn this around. There we go. So what exactly are prions? Prions are essentially proteins that are misfolded. And when we talk about proteins, proteins are essentially like the building blocks in your body. So they can be anything from like an antibody has a protein in it, muscle fibers have protein in it. So imagine proteins that are in your nervous system that are misfolded. And when this misfolded protein touches a normal protein, it causes it to misfold. And when they cluster together, essentially they make holes in the brain. And that's where you get this neurologic disease because it's causing holes in the nervous tissue. Examples of it, some other ones you may have heard of, mad cow disease that affects cattle. There's scrapie that affects sheep. And then Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, which is CJD. That's the human form of a prion disease. So some big things to know about CWD. Where these prions are in their highest concentration in the tissues, those are what's called high-risk parts. Those are, brain, spinal column, can be eyes, lymph nodes, spleen. And this is the reason we have carcass movement restrictions are because of these high-risk parts. The time from when the animal is infected to when they show signs, that's called the incubation period. And that's typically 18 to 24 months. So that's a really long incubation period. And during that time, they appear healthy, but they're also shedding prions into the environment. And so that's really important because it helps us establish a timeline from when individuals are exposed, as well as it helps identify potentially contaminated sites. So that's a big part of why we study the incubation period and why it's important for understanding the disease when you're looking for it. CWD is not HD. So HD is hemorrhagic disease, also referred to as blue tongue. When we're talking about these side by side, CWD is a prion disease, where HD is a viral disease. Chronic wasting disease, as the name implies, chronic, it is a very long disease progression. That long incubation period, it's very long. Versus hemorrhagic disease is something we refer to as acute. It happens very abruptly and they die in days to weeks. A lot of the times when we find hemorrhagic disease deer, they're in good body condition, which is a sign that they died quickly, and near water is a typical sign with them as well. So chronic wasting disease is also 100% fatal, as we mentioned, versus hemorrhagic disease, which actually some animals can survive. They can produce antibodies to these viruses, and they pass those on to their offspring. And that's why we see cyclic periodic outbreaks of it, where there's really bad outbreaks and then it goes away for a little bit. And that's because there's antibodies in the population. That is not true with chronic wasting disease because there are no treatments, there are no vaccines. Once they're infected, they remain infected for their entire lifetime until they die eventually from the disease or other causes. Another big difference is how it's transmitted. So chronic wasting disease is either through direct contact or indirect contact. So that could be in a contaminated environment. It could be, I'm going to talk about transmission a little bit later, so I won't get too far into the weeds. Hemorrhagic disease, as Ben mentioned, that's a vector-borne disease. It's meaning a biting fly carries the virus in it and transmits that to the deer. And lastly, a big difference is the symptoms. So with chronic wasting disease, as I mentioned, with the incubation period, they can look completely healthy and shed the prion the whole time until they become symptomatic. Versus hemorrhagic disease, they're often feverish and found by water. So now the signs and symptoms for chronic wasting disease. First thing you see is some behavioral changes. So there's decreased social interaction, loss of awareness of humans or fear of humans. And then the physical symptoms could be, and these are once again, after that long incubation period, you could start seeing emaciation, excessive salivation, difficulty swallowing. Those are all neurologic signs. Lack of muscle coordination, the stumbling, wide stance, or excessive thirst and excessive urination. So how is it spread? Remember that excessive thirst and salivation and urination? Well, importantly, it's shed in the feces, saliva, and urine, blood as well. It's from direct animal contact. So I said there's two ways. So there's direct and indirect. And this slide will cover direct, so that's contact. Contaminated body fluids. There's a lot of behavior that deer do that can promote transmission. So this is all natural spread of the disease. There's also this mother to offspring, which has been documented more recently. So they know that mothers that are infected with CWD can pass that to their offspring, which means essentially you're getting fawns that are born positive. The environmental contamination. This is the indirect route that CWD can transmit to deer. Essentially, prions are extremely hardy in the environment. They don't degrade, meaning you have to get like 1,000 degrees Celsius to burn these. They can last for years in the environment. In scrapie studies, you're looking 10 years plus that they stay on the landscape. That's important because when you talk about the spread, basically carcasses left on the landscape, scrapes where they're urinating or salivating can be contaminated, mineral licks, anywhere where there's body fluid contact. So that creates a contaminated site. And also there's some other weird caveats with this prion. There's plants that can actually pull these prions up in their roots and they get into the tissue of the plant. Along with that, there's soils that can bind them tightly, meaning they stay in that soil. Clay is one of those. The other part of this is spread of CWD from human-mediated cause. So baiting activities, as I mentioned, saliva, urine. So every time you see a bait pile, how many people have seen corn gobble up, like deer gobble up the corn and then it falls back out, or they pee on the pile, or they're pooping there. So that all increases the likelihood that the prions are in the environment and that they can be passed to other deer. Movement of high-risk parts. If you take an infected animal with those like brain, spinal column, all those organs in there, and then you dump it on the back 40, that spot has now been contaminated with prions because they're going to become leach into the soil and stay bound in that soil. And then improper disposal. So basically contaminating new environments if you're not properly disposing them. And then scavengers have been shown they can move prions on the landscape. There we go. So this is just a big map to show you guys the geographic extent of CWD. It was first discovered in like 1967 out in Colorado in mule deer. And since then, I don't know if the pointer works. Oh, it does. It has spread, all across the East Coast. We've been watching Tennessee for a long time. We're very concerned about this Virginia expansion. And then recently, Indiana got a new positive last year as well. And then here we have Ballard and this new one here in Breckinridge. Am I pointing the wrong way? Okay. Public health. This is one of the big questions we get is the deer safe to eat? And the answer is no, based on what the World Health Organization and the CDC says. So what they do is they use this precautionary approach, saying we don't have any documented cases in humans, but because we know the disease is always fatal, and there's been other prion diseases that have jumped species, meaning like mad cow disease that was able to infect humans, and it did cause fatalities. So they want you to approach with abundance of caution, and that's why they recommend that if an animal tests positive, to not eat it. Our partners, hold on. Oh, I missed this. I was going to cover a slide from public health. Essentially, public health had provided a slide that was saying, use good hygiene practices, wear your gloves, don't cook your meat thoroughly, and don't eat meat that's test positive. What I wanted to cover here was why we care, the impacts on deer populations. Essentially, prevalence. I'm going to cover what is prevalence and why does prevalence matter. So prevalence is the number of infected individuals in the population. And what we see is as prevalence increases, it has a lot of dramatic effects in the deer population. The first one being as environmental contamination increases, you see a rise in the prevalence in the population, which makes sense because that's an indirect form of the spread. The other one that's really important is growth and productivity of the population. So of the deer herd actually decreases as the prevalence increases. And that's because it has impacts on the age that they can survive to. Lastly, that mother to offspring spread as mother to offspring spreads, as prevalence increases. So you get a higher prevalence, you'll see more fawns that are positive because they're getting infected from their mothers. This is a new study out of Arkansas. A lot of research that's been done on CWD and impacts in deer has been in the western part of the country. This is closer to us here, closer to the east. And what they're finding, and you can see it's pretty clear, if you're CWD positive, you are not surviving as long as if you're CWD negative. Essentially, they're not even surviving a full year. Only 50% of the CWD positives won't survive a year. So what can you do? If you guys see sick deer on the landscape, we have an online reporting system. This QR code would take you directly to our sick deer reporting page. Otherwise, you can look up the wildlife health and disease page, and there's a reporting link for deer right here. There we go. So the last thing I was going to cover, I'm just going to intro you guys into Joe's talk, who's coming up. Essentially, what happened here in Breckinridge, what we know. So this is the first detection in a captive cervid facility. It was a 4-year-old doe that was harvested. CWD was confirmed on immunohistochemistry, so that's IHC, that's the gold standard test by the USDA's National Veterinary Service Laboratory. So this is a true detection, we know that. The CWD response, our number one priority is to sample the wild deer in close proximity to this facility because we know the prion was in the facility and now we need to know if it has spilled over into the wild deer outside the facility. And then the next is prioritizing the surveillance dose. So sampling goals to determine whether we can detect the disease in the population if it's there. And then lastly, some of response efforts. KDA, Office of the State Veterinarian, is investigating the movements of the cervids associated with this facility. And then KDFWR has established the CWD surveillance zone and the regulations to determine the disease and if it's there. And with that, I'll turn it over.
All right, thank you, Dr. Casey. I should have mentioned earlier, we're going to hold questions until the end of the presentations, and then we'll have a panel discussion where you can ask any question that you like. So up next, we have our Deer Program Coordinator, Mr. Joe McDermott, and he's going to give us an overview of chronic wasting disease and the surveillance zone.
Howdy, folks. Everybody hear me all right? All right. My name is Joe McDermott, and I am the Deer Coordinator for Kentucky. Chrissy's kind of set the stage for what CWD is, why we care about it. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing about it and what we plan to do. Before we get too deep into it, I do want to highlight that captive cervid facilities are kind of a complex set of regulations. I'm simplifying it very much right now, but for, again, simplicity's sake, KDA, Kentucky Department of Agriculture, focuses on what's in the pen, right? Those deer. We care about the fence itself and what's outside of the deer. It's my clicker and I've got it upside down too. All right, so what we know about it so far is a CWD detection in Breckinridge County, which is the first ever captive cervid detection in the state of Kentucky. She was an adult female, aged at least 4 years old, that was apparently healthy inside of a breeding facility in good standing. She was harvested for meat and then taken to a processor. But as a part of that KDA regulation that we talked about, all deer that die in these facilities must be tested. So when they slaughtered this animal, took it to processor for meat, the sample was submitted, and then we were notified of the positive result. Okay, so when it's sent to the National Veterinary Service Lab, NVSL, if it's a positive result, it kicks it right straight to KDA and us. So that's how we got it, through KDA's testing requirements in the breeding operation. So what are we going to do about it? Again, like we mentioned, our main priority is outside of the fence. We need to know if the disease is present out there, if it is, how much is out there, where it's at, all that stuff. We know there's interactions along the fences of these facilities. I'll show you on the next slide. So it's a very real possibility that it could be out there. We are prepared. We have a CWD response plan, this thing here on the right. You can look it up on our website. It's a living, breathing document that we've had in place since 2002 that incorporates all the new science, best management practices for CWD, all that stuff. And what it really does is it guides you on your initial actions. So when we have this detection, the response plan says do X, Y, Z, right? That's what this does. It helps guide us. And we periodically review this and update it as new science and information emerges. We've also been doing this for a long time. When CWD crossed the Mississippi River into Wisconsin in 2002, we started doing sampling. And we have sampled over 60,000 deer and 1,000 elk since that time. We do a lot of routine surveillance to make sure, or as best we can, that if and when we do find it, we're very hopeful that it will be at a low prevalence, so not everywhere on the landscape. And again, like we said, this is comprised of national standards from AFWA, Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, basically a big conglomeration of research. All goes into this. Here we're talking about, this is not the facility in question, but you can see that's a deer inside of a captive service facility, that's a deer outside of it. This is in Kentucky. So we know this stuff does happen. But what we've done so far, our response plan, like I said, it kicks off X, Y, Z, things that you have to do. One of them is notifying stakeholders. So once we found out about the disease, we immediately start with that. Our I&E and communications teams have done a great job. They've put out over 15 press releases, e-blasts, Facebook posts, all that stuff, trying to get the word out to folks like you. We also had a special call commission meeting about a week after the detection where we went to our board of directors and presented what we know about the case. So there we were. And then we assessed deer populations within the first week or so too. Like I said, there's a lot of interactions inside and outside of the fence. But, and as Chrissy mentioned, we need to sample most intensively around it. So to do that, we need to understand how many deer there are, what the density is, to calculate the number of samples. So we went around, done that, all around that facility. And then there's also an epidemiologic investigation, basically just movement of captive deer. Where did they come from? Where did they go? What were their statuses of disease? Were they positive, not detected? That stuff, which is being spearheaded by KDA right now. But we do include it in here because depending on what the investigation reveals, this all could change. Maybe something else comes up. So at that special call commission meeting, we took everything that we knew at the time to them and presented to them and asked them to enact the CWD surveillance zone regulations. How you delineate a CWD surveillance zone, it differs on wild populations or captive cervid facility detections. But essentially, that star is the index facility approximately. You take that, draw a buffer around it. Whatever counties are encompassed by this buffer become your surveillance zone. And the whole point behind these buffers or delineating these different counties is to help you focus in on where you're looking, right? Deer disperse, they move. If I was only looking at one farm or one spot, I'm probably doing myself a disservice, right? Because they move so far. So we need to make sure we're casting a wide enough net. But what does this mean in a nutshell? Again, enhanced disease surveillance, it focuses our efforts on what we're doing. There's no baiting or feeding within the zone, no carcass transportation like whole carcasses out of the zone or high-risk parts, and then no deer rehabilitation in this area either. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these things next. All right, baiting and feeding restrictions inside the CWD surveillance zone. We've got a little graphic here to just try and show you, but essentially, if you're putting out any type of attractant that's not scent, that is considered baiting, right? Shell corn, apples, supplemental feed, mineral blocks, you name it. But we do allow food plots, and I'll tell you why. When, as Chrissy talked about earlier, you heard her say, the deer were eating and the corn falls out of her mouth, right? But while they're sitting here visiting these spots, they're salivating, they're urinating, they're defecating, they're contaminating the spot. And think about it like a normal corn pile, right? Like a 3x3 square. And you're bringing deer in from hundreds of acres and different farms, and they're all coming and hitting this spot. So one deer that's positive goes and eats, contaminates it, then the other deer come, right? In a food plot, they vary widely. They could be a quarter acre, 10 acres, you name it. But the important thing about a food plot is the concentration, right? You have this this box, this 3x3 foot box that they come to, or you have, call this a 2 acre field. You got 1 or 2 does eating here, one over there, one over there. They're not hitting the same spots continuously. They're almost like self-regulating or rotational grazing through it. They're moving, right? But the important part is they're dispersed. It's not a super concentrated effort of drawing in deer to one little spot. Why do we care? I realize this is not a very good picture. It's pretty grainy, but it illustrates the point well. It makes deer do unnatural things, right? We know through CWD, tuberculosis, different things, this facilitates disease transmission, right? When you're bringing in all these other deer, they're coming in. All it takes is that one infected animal, and then it's potentially infecting others. It encourages unnatural deer behavior. Most of the time you're looking at maternal groups for does, 4 or 5 animals, a doe and her offspring, their offspring. You have batcher groups and bucks, but generally you're not normally seeing massive concentrations of 20, 30 plus deer eating out of the same little spot, right? It makes them do things that are unnormal. And then it also artificially inflates carrying capacity, increases deer populations on a local scale, right? So it basically is putting more deer on the landscape than the habitat can support, which has cascading effects for deer, other wildlife, and their habitats in the area. Carcass transportation restrictions, Chrissy talked about a minute ago, there's a lot of different parts of that animal that are infectious, right? And there are some parts more so than others. And this graphic here is kind of meant to show you the different transmission routes, show you how it passes, some of the uncertainties. But what I want you to take away from this graph is there's a lot of things that we can't control. Deer groom, they're social critters. They lick each other, they groom. There's some of those things that are just out of our control, but we can control some of it, like baiting, like carcass transportation. So it's about controlling what you can. So the carcass transportation restrictions obviously are important. Prevents disease spread through environmental contamination, helps with our surveillance efforts, and supports our management strategies. Limiting the spread, keeping the infectious material in a localized area, not taking it out and spreading it to other places. So just to try to highlight this a little bit better, because we get a lot of questions about the carcass movement restrictions. The key here is where the deer originated, okay? So this is green. All these arrows are green. That means it's okay. If you harvest the deer, like say in Bullitt County or LaRue or Ohio, anywhere else in Kentucky, you can take those animals without doing anything to them in the zone. You can utilize the processors in the zone, the taxidermists, all the other services that are there. It's business as normal. That deer originated outside of the zone, right? And on the same note, you can also move deer within the zone, right? Without having to do anything special. I can kill a deer in Hardin County and take it to a processor and meat and be fine, status quo. Where you get into issues are when you're trying to leave the zone, right? So hopefully these graphics help you. Again, if you kill a deer in Hardin, you can move it into Meade, move it into Breckinridge, you can move it out of the zone, into the zone. You just can't take the stuff out, right? And if you do take it out, right, it has to be deboned meat, finished taxidermy products, clean hides, all that stuff, right? Basically removing that heavily infectious material to reduce transmission. Next steps, what we're planning to do now, we are very similar to what we do in the Purchase region down around Ballard where we had the other detection. We're going to take a hunter's first approach. Now I've thrown these graphs up here just so you can see. I want to highlight the fact that we kill a lot of deer in these 3 counties. On any given year, you're killing 8,000 to 9,000 deer, okay? There are a lot of animals in these areas. The samples are there to be gotten. I think it'll make more sense if we go to the next one. So, but what does that really mean for you guys? For this year, no hunting season date changes for 2024 in the surveillance zone. We're not going to have any mandatory checks in the surveillance zone, and that goes back to this big harvest and infrastructure. So here we kill 8,000 or 9,000 deer in the 3 counties, right? A lot of deer harvests, heavy deer densities, good hunting ground, like in Ballard, Fulton, Hickman. These counties, these big heavy ag counties over there, they're only killing like 400 or 500 deer a year, right? They also don't have as many processors or places to collect samples from. Their infrastructure is not there. Over here, a lot of deer harvest. There's like 6 processors in these 3 counties, so there's a big infrastructure here and harvest taking place that we don't have in West Kentucky. So we're trying to not impose any additional regulations on you guys, and we're going to try to do it voluntarily. We're going to set up some processors. We'll talk about some other stuff in a minute, but we're going to try and get our samples using you guys to do it. Just like, hunters are the primary managers of wildlife populations, and we're going to continue that trend, letting you all control the population and help us collect our samples. Importantly for many of you right here, there's no targeted removal or culling by Kentucky Fish and Wildlife planned. That's a big common misconception you get when CWD pops up. Everybody thinks that we're going to come in and like nuke the ground or something. That's not what we're planning to do. Again, we want a hunters first approach. We want our hunters to have their chance at doing it. So that's really our plan for collecting the samples for this year. We will be working at 3 processors during the opening or during the modern firearms weekends. Webb's, McCain's, Coda Ridge. Samples are there to get, the deer are there to get. Please go hunting, harvest deer like you normally would, maybe take an extra one and bring them to us. The important thing is we have to know what's going on outside this fence. We need to know if it's there, and if it is there, where it is and how much of it, so that we can understand what's going on. Until we know what we're dealing with, we can't take appropriate actions, if that makes sense. So we need the samples to understand the full picture. Again, we're going to use you guys. We want hunters to come to processors. If you go to a taxidermist in the area, we also do road kills or target what we call target animals, sick animals, and then the volunteer hunters mission. So ways that you guys can test, like I said, we are going to be working with those processors, and huge thank you to them, by the way, for letting us do that. It's an amazing help. But we also got these other options available for you guys too. So we have these CWD sample drop-off sites, which are just chest freezers. But there's at least 2 in every county over here in Breckinridge, Hardin, and Meade now. So we will be here working on modern firearm weekends. If you want to submit a deer for testing that you've killed in archery season, late muzzleloader season, something like that, these are available 24/7. You can bring them in on the weekends, but they're available to you at any time to get a sample submitted to us. You will have results back 2 to 4 weeks. It kind of depends on what time of year, but generally 2 to 4 weeks, you'll have your results back. You can look it up online. All the instructions that you need and materials are going to be on top of the freezer inside of it. It's really a simple process. I just pretty much need a deer head with a little bit of neck still attached. Then we've also got these mail-in kits, and these are new to us. We're pretty excited about them. Basically what it is, you sign up, say, hey, I want to do CBD sample collections on my own. There's instruction sheets in here. There's tags. There's gloves, everything you need to take the sample on your own. You can put it back in an envelope, postage is paid, send it to us. You'll get your result. We get our sample. So we're trying to offer a bunch of different testing options to make it convenient and available to you guys to have that peace of mind. If you come to one of our partnering processors, or if you go to a freezer or utilize a mailing kit, it doesn't matter. We need some geographic information for the samples. So if we're talking about finding out if it's present or not, right? We need to know where the negatives are as much as the positives. And what this will do, this know before you go, if you scan this QR code, it'll take you to a thing. You can type in the address of your farm or search it, and it'll give you a little grid. So when you submit a sample to us at a processor or a checks that drop-off site, mailing kit, we're going to ask that geographic information. Here's just a real easy way to look it up before you go, right? So you're not sitting there trying to figure it out on the fly. But yeah, that's really it for me. I'm sorry, it is not it for me. This right here, shoot for samples. New incentive this year. We're trying to encourage you guys to submit these CWD samples to us. And to do that, my biologist, Tommy, came up with a very creative idea this year to incentivize you guys. So basically, the gist is, if you put a head in my freezer, in one of our freezers, you send me a sample through a mailing kit, you get entered to win a $1,000 gift card from Uncle Lee's. So everybody that goes, and you get an entry for every deer. So lay it to them. Increase your odds. This QR code here will take you directly to the Shoot for Samples page, tell you all more information about it. But yeah, help us get some samples. Maybe you get you a $1,000 gift card from our awesome sponsor. Go kill another deer. But that's not it for me, man. I thought I was done. All right, this is the last slide, I promise. All right, looking ahead. So again, just to recap, determining the disease presence or absence in the wild herd is our main priority, right? We need to know what's going on so that we can take appropriate actions in the future. We want to continue to use hunting as a primary management surveillance tool to get those samples for us, right? We don't want to come in and do that work for you. And then this right here is different. It says the response and management plan. So this is in development. We talked about this response plan being a guiding document, but it really only helps you in your initial steps. We need to think about how we're going to manage for this disease now that we found it, right? What are your short-term goals, long-term goals? Are there potentials to walk restrictions back? All of these things are about to be critically evaluated, and we hope to put out this new document sometime spring or summer this next year. And now that is it. There's been a lot thrown at you. I know this meeting's recorded and you guys can go back and look at it, but if you just got some burning questions, you want to know more about CWD and what we're doing about it in Kentucky, I encourage you to go to fw.ky.gov/CWD. There is tons and tons of really nice educational material on here to help you guys out. But that's it for me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. A lot of good information there. Hopefully you're not on information overload at this point, but I know you've got a lot of questions, and I promise we're going to get to a question and answer session and give you a chance to ask us a few things and voice any concerns that you may have. But before we do that, we have one other presenter that we'd like to welcome to the stage. And if you're not familiar with the way we're governed or overseen within our agency, we have a 9-member commission. We've got a couple of our commission members here with us, joining us tonight. And one, Dr. Robin Floyd, our first district commissioner, was kind enough to come all the way from Murray, Kentucky, to speak with us tonight. As you know, and Joe referenced a couple times, we've been dealing with positive detection of CWD in far western Kentucky and Ballard County now for a year or two. And Dr. Floyd, we just asked him to share a few words about how things have been going in West Kentucky, some of his experiences, some of the feedback he's receiving from his constituents. So yeah, Dr. Floyd, if you don't mind to come up and take it away.
You hear me now? I was real happy to be here at the high school because 6 of the best years of my life were spent at Hickman County High School where I went. So anyway, it's nice to meet you all. I enjoyed coming up here. Y'all live in a beautiful place. I want to talk a little bit about what's happened down in far western Kentucky, down in the poor section of the state. We implemented these CWD restrictions after we had found a deer that was positive, that was 8 miles from our state border, our southern border. It was in Henry County, Tennessee. Since that time, another deer has been found positive in Henry County, Tennessee, and another deer in Weakley County, Tennessee, also close to the state border. So initially 5 counties were, when we triggered our CWD response zone, 5 counties became surveillance zone counties. That was Hickman County, Fulton County, Graves County, Callaway County, and Marshall County. And at the time that happened, I was pretty familiar with all of them. I was born in Fulton County and I grew up in Hickman County. I hunted in Graves County. I lived in Callaway County and I worked in Marshall County. So it's serious for me. The restrictions, I think, worked pretty well because if you look at places that have had positive CWD that haven't implemented restrictions, it spreads like wildfire. In our case, we went about 3 years before we had another positive, or before we had a positive in our state. And there was a lot of doubt that that even came from Tennessee. It was in Ballard County. It was pretty close to Missouri, where they have had positives, but 55 miles from the closest positive in Tennessee. So what we're trying to do is what my grandmother used to say is, she used to say a stitch in time saves 9. What we're trying to do is take what I think are relatively conservative action restrictions right now in order to make sure that we try to do our best to slow this down. We're not saying that we think we can eliminate CWD, not at all, but I think we can maybe keep it from occurring in a lot of places if we are all able to kind of work together. So, are there any questions anybody might have of me? Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, if we know that the first case was in 1967 in the captive area in Colorado with the mule deer, and we know that when they're heavily concentrated, there's more of a chance of CWD affecting the herd. And if we, as the hunters, that are real hunters, not shooters on high-fence game farms, if we're the managers of this, why are high-fence game farms allowed to put the risk of our future of hunting for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren? Why is this allowed in our state? And what benefit does these high-fence game farms have for the common hunter? Or is it a business?
It's a business. After this one was found at the captive cervid facility here, I took a meeting with Senator Jason Howell. I believe he's the head of our Senate Ag Committee, and he grew up hunting and fishing. His family's from a small farm down in the 1st District. And I told him what really right now, the meat of the regulations are managed by ag, and we'd like to be the ones that manage those, but the deer farmers don't want Fish and Wildlife to be the ones managing. They, for that reason, it's a business, and they realize it would cut into their business. So I'm not a big fan of high fence operations. I'm not sure that Fish and Wildlife can stop that, though. Just so that you know,
Well, I mean,
ag has a huge lobby.
Folks, if you don't mind, we're going to hold our questions until the end because this is being videoed. We're going to have microphones running for our Q&A session.
Yeah.
So we are going to hold those until the end. If you don't mind.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Just ask you a question.
Yeah, I did ask a question.
Just to be clear, he asked.
You're correct, he did, but I'd like to hold those until the end so we can get our microphones going so that everybody can hear.
I'll come back.
We'll get Dr. Floyd back up on the panel here so that we've got our mics and we can capture everything on video.
You're welcome. Good question.
All right, folks. Before we enter that Q&A period, we're going to do one more round. Now that we went through our presentations and we've given you a lot of information, we're going to do one more round of the VVOX survey. So we'll get the QR code back out. If anybody wants to pull their phone back out, answer a few more questions, and then we're going to jump right in to our panel discussion. All right, is that everybody that's going to participate? All right, if we can get your attention for just a few more minutes, and then we'll get the panel up here for some questions. But Tommy, go ahead and get that question up for us. Okay, what concerns you the most about the effects of chronic wasting disease on Kentucky? And you can select up to 3 here. Good time. Hey folks, there's a snapshot of the answers. Okay, we'll go to our next question. Which of the following actions would you support to reduce the spread of CWD? And again, this is if we find out that CWD is more widespread than what we realize. So what action would you support to reduce the spread? You can select all that apply. All right, so here's the answers there, all over the board. Okay, for hunter-oriented efforts in a CWD zone, which of the following would you support? And again, a lot of this is based on if you detect CWD, it's more widespread, you're looking to reduce deer numbers using hunters, things like that. So folks, there's the responses. Okay, Okay, a few easy ones to close this out. Do you support or oppose mandatory checking in of harvested deer by Kentucky Fish and Wildlife? And if so, how long would you support this?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, there's the results. Do you support or oppose the creation of additional opportunities to harvest deer with a firearm in a CWD zone?
Yeah, like our kids, this is like two events, like adaptation, so they are able to.
Okay, there's the results for that question. Do you feel well informed about the Department of Fish and Wildlife's response to chronic wasting disease? Okay, there's your results. And I believe our last question, we have one more time? Two more questions? Okay. Okay, how do you prefer to receive updates or information about the department's response? You can select all that apply. All right, there's our final results. Really appreciate everybody playing along. This is very useful information for us that we'll go back and take a closer look at and reevaluate how we message, how we inform folks, where we may be falling short and what we're doing well. So thank you very much. With that, now we're going to transition into the much anticipated question and answer session. So as we start setting up our room, we're going to pull some lights up, we're going to move some chairs. But we do have one of our captive deer farmers here, Mr. Larry Brooks, that did request some time to come and address the crowd. So Mr. Brooks, we'd be happy to turn the mic over to you for a moment as we set up the room.
Okay, I've got some pictures for you to hand out. Just pass these around and look at them. give you probably most of you have never even been to a deer farm, high fence
Get the
farm.
microphone. Get the microphone.
Okay, probably most of you have never even been to a high fence farm, so you're making judgments that you don't know what you're talking about. All right, so let me tell you, let me fill you on how our farm is ran. Our farm is ran a little different maybe than most people's, but we have a yearly vaccinating program, just like the cattle. I'm a farmer, I'm not a hunter. I don't hunt. I've killed 3 deer in my life. Well, not counting ones I've hit with my car, but I've killed 3 with a gun. But we do our yearly vaccinating program.
I didn't think there was a vaccination for CWD.
Not CWD.
CWD.
For all, just like you do cattle, there's no vaccination for mad cow disease neither. It's the same thing. Blood tested, we do blood tests for TB and brucellosis. We're all negative on all that. We do a 100% test on every animal that dies on our farm. We send the brain, stem, and the lymph nodes in. 100%. This is the first one that came back positive. We've been in business 4 years. We've killed everything that we brought into our farm in the last 3 years. They said up here on the screen, 18 to 24 months, they're going to die. Okay, we killed everything except that one doe that we got back positive. She's more like 6 years old. Everything has come back negative in the last 3 years that we brought into our farm. Everything has died. So we had to kill that so these other farmers could be released. It's not like, going out and just shooting a deer. These deer are like our cattle. I mean, I look at them, we go out and we can pet some of our deer. We feed them apples, we feed them bread. They come up and eat out of our hand. We're personally involved with every one of them. But all that don't mean nothing, because we've got to kill every one of them in order to try to stop this disease. And I'm all for that, is to stopping the disease. But we feed our deer fresh water every day. They don't never have to drink muddy water. They get fresh water every day. They get fresh feed every day. We go out every day, put fresh feed in. Yes, sir. No, sir. I don't. I wish I had. Well, it don't help. If you'll look on these other websites, farms that have double fence still have CWD on both sides. It's carried by coons, possums, birds, and squirrels. It's carried by all that. What I'm saying is everything we brought into our farm in the last 3 years has been killed and tested, and it's all come back negative. So if she'd only had it for 6 to 9 months, then evidently she got it from the outside the pen. So that's saying you guys may have given it to my deer. It's just as easy.
No, it's only that there's no way to know.
There's no way. I mean, our deer's not dying from the disease. We've had them more than 2 years. So evidently they don't have it. Everything we brought in has been negative. If this one was even positive, maybe it got contaminated. I don't know. But we feed our deer an 18 to 20% protein feed in the winter, in the summertime. In the wintertime, we feed them 16%. So they get more energy out of it keep them warm and everything in the wintertime. And
We would like to answer all the questions. Just
All
give
right, folks.
respectful of the time.
Mr. Bush, we really appreciate you speaking with the
All
group
right.
and being willing to do that. We're going to go ahead and call our panel up.
I'd like to invite any of you to come over and see my farm. I mean, you have to wear your rubber boots because they don't want to spread the disease.
Where's your farm at?
It's in Custer.
If you'll give me Dad, you can stay here with me. If you'll give me just a couple minutes as well, I would like to answer the question of the gentleman and know that you all do have a lot of questions and speculations and suspicions, and that's really why we came. We have no desire to point fingers or create any animosity or anything going on in between hunters. I've family full of hunters as well, and we've had a lot of support from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, from the Department of Ag, and from fellow farmers and community members, venison eaters who don't like to hunt. And so we will clarify that it is a business just like farming other animals, farming sheep, farming cattle, and it really is not intended to have any sort of impact on fish and wildlife. We would never want to hinder or present the idea that people should not hunt. We also hunt in the wild and eat the venison that we hunt, and so we truly don't want there to be any animosity. We want even the situation that's going on to have positive outcomes for all of hunters, landowners. So there are just some really quick points that I'll make before your panel, and we can participate in the panel as well.
We're short on time, and we did fit you guys in off the agenda, so we really appreciate you taking some time. And you can be around to ask questions. You can sit on our panel if you'd like to do that. We'll give you a chair up here.
Absolutely.
We'll have to, if somebody can go to the back and grab a chair, but for now we want to keep going because a lot of folks have a lot of questions, and we want to respect everybody's time as well. So we're going to call our panel up. We've got Deputy Commissioner Gabe Jenkins, we've got Dr. Christine Casey, we've got Dr. Velasco, the state agriculture vet, and we've got Mr. Joe McDermott, our deer coordinator. Now what I will set a few ground rules for our questions, and I would ask that you respect this for the video and for everybody else in the room. I'll facilitate, I will call on folks, and I'll rotate each section. I'll go across so that everybody's getting a fair shot. We're going to have 2 runners with microphones running up and down the aisle. So when I call on you, we'll bring the mic over to you, and we want you to ask that question in the microphone so that we can hear that on our recording and so that everybody else can hear that as well. So please respect that for us, and we'll make this a really great question and answer session. So where are my microphone runners? Okay. I'm going to give you guys this mic, kind of toward the bottom. Let's start on this side of the room. You got any hands up? Ask a question. Back there, that gentleman in the back, not over here.
I think we're gonna start with, you got somebody who's gonna start getting that.
How long had the deer been on the farm that tested positive for the CWD?
Thank you for that question. It really is a very valid question. So the deer had been on our farm for almost 3 years, and according to the testing, had only had CWD for about 6 to 8 months. Also, all of the deer that had been brought onto the farm in any amount of time before that had all been depopulated and have tested negative, so it did not come from any of those animals. So it has entered somehow that was not from bringing in captive deer, nor did she have it before arrival to the farm.
Okay, let's go to the center part of the room. Hands up for questions. Go ahead, John.
I've got a couple of questions written down here. I'll start with the beginning and probably the most easy one. In the beginning, we filled out a form for communication. I've personally emailed each commissioner, and I have not heard a response from any of them. I've also called the District 3 commissioner and left a voicemail and text and haven't heard anything back from them. In contrast, I've reached out to all my representatives and senators, state and federal, and heard a response from each. So I'm not sure how much communication you're looking for when we're dealing with a situation like this and 9 commissioners couldn't respond. That's my first question. I'll wait. Why is Grayson County not included? Because a 15-mile radius circle clearly encompasses Grayson County. It's 12.2 miles to the Grayson County border from Mr. Brooks's farm, which is the index site. So are we picking and choosing which counties are in it, which are not, or are we not following our regulation?
So I'll handle, y'all hear me? So I'll handle the Grayson County question. So in our response plan, we talk about those distances and what that looks like. And we try to make decisions that make the most sense to us biologically and of concern. And so when we looked at that, it encompassed so little of Grayson County that we did not feel like it was relevant to include that to overburden the hunters. And so we did not put that in the CWD surveillance zone. For that reason, we felt that the risk was low at this time. So this is our first year and our first effort. However, we will be increasing our sampling efforts in that county to get more samples to see, but we did not think that it was worth making it a restriction to put on burden when we didn't know if the disease was prevalent there, and the risk we looked at this point was low.
Actually, that's a great answer. I'm glad you said that, because during the commissioners' meeting, it was stated, may we enact parts of this, some of, and it was clearly stated by the Department of Agriculture when the 3rd District Commissioner asked, no, you will enact all or none. So now you're stating that you can enact part of it because you took your definition of a 15-mile radius circle, which is a definition. Don't shake your head. It clearly, the 3rd District Commissioner, I know you're here and I know you asked and you abstained from voting. So you clearly can pick parts. Grayson County should be included and you know it.
So the 3rd District Commission member is not here.
That's wonderful.
He had another obligation he wasn't able to attend. And we did stick to the regulation. And if you look at the regulation, it calls for what we covered on baiting and feeding and carcass transportation and requirements for mandatory check in the surveillance zone. In the regulation, it doesn't speak to how a surveillance zone is determined. That's found within our CWD response plan. And I will say that we did the exact same thing in Western Kentucky, where it picked up a very small portion of another county, and we chose not to include it to not overburden our hunters. And so that's what we're trying to tell you and express to you is we don't want to do this any more than what y'all want to do with it. So we're trying to find a very level-headed approach that makes sense for us to be able to survey the wildlife and to understand what the disease may or may not look like on the landscape. So, we made that decision and we stand behind that decision on not including that county because we didn't think the risk was low, and nor did we think that it should be something that we should impose. If we find the disease on the landscape and it's at a higher level, then we'll reevaluate that and make those requests to our commission.
And so back to my first point, how long before I should receive a response from all the people that have emailed, called, and left a message? And I do think it's a shame, I don't want to curse, that a situation this dire and the 3rd District Commissioner was unable to make it. I guess that would explain why he didn't answer my email, my text, or my phone call, or my voicemail, along with the 9 others. But my state legislature did, and my U.S. legislatures did respond. So I appreciate the 9 of you being supportive on this.
Sir, I'd like to address the first part of your question. I didn't receive your email.
Sir, I will carbon copy it tomorrow, and I'll copy everyone in here and show you the email with your email address, Doc. It's on there.
I'm not saying that you...
It came from the U.S. Army.
But what I'll be willing to do and happy to do is if you have time after this, I'll answer any
I'm sure
questions.
you are now that you're called out. I'm sure you have time now.
And I'll give you my cell number and you can call me if you have more questions. And I'll answer anybody's question, not just his. I'll be up here, brown hat, so.
Having a hard time seeing hands.
Tommy, when we just call it Ben, Tommy?
My question is, realistically, how long do you think that these restrictions will be? Like one season, 2 seasons? Like how long do you think they're gonna be in effect?
I've got the mic,
I'll go ahead and speak. So, we'll look at Western Kentucky as kind of our model. We're 3 years in West Kentucky, and we're kind of understanding that. So this season will be year 1, and so I would guess a couple years, but it'll also depend on what we find and what Kentucky Department of Agriculture will find. And then also, Joe mentioned this in his survey, is that we need to write a CWD management plan and put that out for public input and take that to our board on what our recommendations would be and what those look like on how we manage the disease and also how we walk back restrictions if we don't find the disease. So it's a great question. Our response plan is backed by science, and so the management plan would be there as well. So to be determined, but a handful of years for right now is what I would guess at this point. John?
All right, I got a question. Larry, I worked with you for 7, 8 years. Got no hope. You do what you gotta do, buddy, make a living. I hunt the farm. I can stand on my farm and shoot an arrow and kill one of Larry's deers if I want to. Don't take this wrong, Larry. Are they still doing business as usual?
No, sir. No.
Is Jake Anderson in Guston, Kentucky doing business as usual? Is he buying and selling deer?
As soon as we get our test back from well, we got it back today. It came back negative, so Jake is cleared to no deer because everything we got from him is negative. Everything we bought in the last 3 years is negative. That's what got us wondering what happened and how it happened. Because so if it's true and science says it was in one lymph node in that doe, she'd had it 6 to 9 months. So where did she get it? That's what we're trying to figure out. Where did she get it? There's 70 deer in a 1 mile stretch between the end of our driveway and our house. When the soybeans were green, we counted 70 wild deer.
I'm trying to take care of that for you,
I
Larry.
wish you would. Make sure you say that.
Is everyone
But
able to?
you answer my question.
They're gonna kill all of our deer.
They're gonna kill all yours.
100%. The wild deer around it that may have given it to them.
I can answer through the mic as well, so everyone not within earshot can hear. He asked if we are still doing business as usual. We are not. The response is either to be completely shut down for 5 years with no buying, selling, moving in or out, which I'm sure if you're a farmer, if you have any other animals, you know that that's complete decimation to an enterprise. You would not be able to afford to feed and care for animals for 5 years with no potential for income. So unfortunately, the response because we are an agricultural enterprise, will be complete decimation of our farm. The farms that we had bought from, since we had bought that doe and brought her in, we have depopulated all of those deer, and they have come back negative. So part of the trace in, trace out, it does release them because that confirms that we did not get it from their farm. So, within all of the stipulations, they begin to conduct their business, but we will not be able to.
I've got one in the back, Tom.
Yeah, I did some research and looked up a couple of biologists who have been checking this CWD out for about 50 years. And they both said, and a couple of others that I researched, that putting out corn for these deer and wildlife officials not thinking that deer herds are going, deer out in regular fields and stuff like that are going to spread it like wildfire. They said that they didn't know why people was making that decision for it, because it wasn't really proven that that corn and them deer eating that corn or salt lick or mineral lick was going to spread it more than anything else. And also, y'all was supposed to have meetings with the public 30 days before y'all made this decision right at that moment, because I watched you on Facebook and that live when you decided to stop people from putting out corn and stuff. How come y'all made that decision right then instead of waiting to get the public's input on it and stuff like that before you just jumped right into it and stopped it?
I'm hoping it works. So I'll talk to the baiting idea. I'm not sure which biologist you're referring to, but they're. he is a biologist. So what I would say to the baiting, there's actually a significant amount of peer-reviewed literature out there, so scientific research, that's looking at transmission through prions. So we talked about prions and how you can detect them. There's some new research. I think you may have heard of RT-QUIC. So that's a real-time inducing like quaking assay. It's not validated in live deer, but it has been used in research for environmental detections. And what they're doing is they're actually looking at bait piles, mineral licks, and they're going to these sites and they're collecting environmental samples and they're testing and they're actually finding the prion on these bait sites and on mineral licks. And because the prion is there and we know animals are visiting, they're clearly getting exposed. So we know this is one avenue that the disease can spread. The concept behind the regulations is that you have to focus on, the disease is very complex. I mentioned all those ways that it can be transmitted. Essentially, you have to target each one and try to like stop the risk there. So you're lowering the risk by reducing the baiting. You're lowering the risk by reducing carcass movement. So you tackle it from like every avenue that you can. And baiting and movement is some of the lowest hanging fruit. And that's why the AFWA BMPs recommend that you prohibit those activities. Do you want to speak to the other part?
So the second part of that question was related to the 30-day public meeting. So in that, it calls for us to host the meeting within 30 days of the detection of the disease. And so that is the point of this meeting. It doesn't say when we have to have it as far as when we make our recommendations or not. It just says we have to have this meeting to talk and to provide public input and forums. So when a special call commission meeting or when we take things to our board, it doesn't speak to that in the response plan.
We haven't given the center aisle any love. Right here, can we get a microphone up front, please?
John, do we have? We'll move there.
Coming up here.
All right. I got one real quick question. This might seem a little bit off topic, and it's for Mr. Larry. Just out of curiosity, have y'all ever had goats on your farm? Goats or sheep?
Yes.
Yes, we have.
Okay, so this gentleman over here asked about 1967 with Colorado. What they haven't told, and you can actually look this up on the USDA.gov, that case that was found in 1967 was actually a case study by Colorado State University. And those deer were physically injected with scabies. Scabies. It was a test. One died, the rest were released. They were introduced to the scabies gene. They know that's where it came from. You talk about CJD in humans. You talk about mad cow. We all know that's a prion. We know it's a protein. There's been, $5 million worth of research for CJD for humans. There's $39 million worth of research for mad cow. All of a sudden, mad cow just disappeared. I mean, it's still here, but I mean, it's contained, correct? So we know it's a prion. And here's my big question. We know it originated from scabies. He's had scabies on his farm. Goats, we know that's the known carrier. We know that it went to cattle because of goats and sheep being in bone and meat and bone meal. Know for a fact. And we know it's a protein. So here's my question. So the big transmission is urine, feces, and saliva, correct? How much protein is available in saliva? A lot? 1%. 1% of saliva is protein. 99% water, 1%. Less than 1% actually, because less than 0.5% is salt. The other is protein. So there's 0.5% of protein available in saliva. In CJD, it is not contractable to humans by saliva or sexual contact, sexual intercourse. In mad cow, it is not contractable by feces, not contractable by urine, not contractable by saliva. Yet all of a sudden, deer cervids are a unicorn and it's contractable by saliva, feces, and urine. And it's a protein. By the way, there's how much protein's in feces? 2 to 3%. 2 to 3% available in feces.
and it has to be consumed. CJD, mad cow, they know that it is only contractable by injection or by consumption. So my question is, why is cervid the unicorn here? Like, why all of a sudden is it not contractable in humans, it's not contractable in cattle, and all of a sudden it is in cervids by saliva, when there's less than 0.5% of protein available in saliva. There's less than 1% available in urine. And we know this because any mammalian species, if you're passing proteins in your urine, you're experiencing what? Kidney malfunction or kidney failure. That's why when you go to the doctor and you pee in a cup, they check it for proteins. So why are cervids the unicorn here?
So I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to get into the nuances of prions and prion diseases, and unfortunately, the variation in them. So part of the issue that we're talking about here, yes, it's a protein. Yes, it's misfolded. These prions actually exist in your body normally. And so the real issue is cervids aren't a unicorn. What we're talking about here, if we're talking about how it's transmitted from cattle to humans, it was through consumption. But they also know that if you infect it directly into the brain, that they can get it. But that's not a viable way that a disease can be transmitted. So how did the deer get it? They've done studies where they're not injecting it. They literally did a study where they took deer and put it on the landscape, and they got the disease from just a contaminated landscape. So that's how we know that prions that are shed from the body can infect these animals. The other component to that is, so when we talk about prions, I'm gonna get real sciencey here, sorry. So they have these mouse assays, they're bioassays. If you wanna know if the prion can actually induce disease, you take the prion and you put it in a transgenic mouse. So that's where you basically manipulate the genetics to mimic the species that you're looking at. Usually humans, so we make humanized mouse models. And they take this prion and they put it in a mouse. They haven't been able to show that CWD can transmit to humans in these mouse models. However, when you start to change the genetics of that prion, they call it an attack rate. There's a 100% attack rate in some of the mutations, so those are polymorphisms of the prion. So we know that this prion can cause disease using mouse models. And whether it's 1%, if that misfolded protein is there, we don't know the infectious dose, but we do know that exposure to these misfolded proteins will cause the disease, regardless of, they're not injecting it into the brain, they're literally exposing them to urine, to saliva, to an environment, they still get the disease. That doesn't mean that they're a unicorn.
So it's been here for 20 years, how come the herd isn't wiped out? You know, it's in feces, urine, and saliva. It's been here for 20 years, how come it is so explosive and it's through, as social as cervids are, how come it is not just completely mass in the United States? How come it has affected 1 in 1 million deer in the last 2 years in the state of Kentucky? How come we don't see it so anymore?
So, of all the prions.
Your mic's on.
Yeah. Hello. Okay. Of all the prion diseases known, there's not been any that have spread into the wild. Cattle, no. Sheep, no. Oh, hey, are you gonna let me finish, please? So, this is the only disease that is in both the domestic or the livestock considered cervids and the wild cervids. It's also the most infectious of all the prion diseases. Like you say, Creutzfeldt-Jakob, it has transmitted through ingestion. The Kuru tribe in the South Pacific eat up with it. They practice cannibalism. But it is a very transmissible disease, just like Dr. Casey said. It has been proven to be an environmental contaminant, and it will spread environmentally. Saliva, urine, feces might not have much per ounce, but many ounces with many deer, the potential goes up with every defecation, every urination, every drop of saliva that hits the environment. So it stays in the environment, so it goes up over time until it hits an infectious level.
We had a question up front here. It's gonna move back over to you.
Next. I'm Jim Strader. I think some of you folks know who I am. And I've listened very carefully to what y'all said. I had a couple of questions, and any of you may answer it. This has been around for more than 50 years, correct? 50 years. All right. In 50 years' time, there have been CWD cases in various states. No one has ever become sick or died from CWD. Isn't that a correct statement?
Yes, there's been no evidence of humans being infected.
I don't know why we're scaring everybody about eating deer.
Right. I don't think we're trying to scare people. As I mentioned before, that's rough. The precautionary principle. It's out of abundance of caution that they're recommending not to eat it, because if you look at BSD, it was what, 1 in 200,000 cases were when would infect humans. And that could also be, so there's something called like epigenetics. So every person is different, meaning your immune system and my immune system are not the same. Our genetics are not the same. You could be more predisposed to getting BSE than myself.
Well, I could get killed by a car going deer hunting too. I mean,
I understand that, but if you're the 1 in 200,000 and you're contracting an always fatal disease, I have to take the precaution. It's a public health perspective. You would not want to wish fatality on someone. Like, all I can say is it's up to you whether you choose to eat it or not. I'm providing you the most pertinent information from the World Health Organization and the CDC, and they're recommending not to eat a positive animal. And what you do with that information is completely your own.
all right. There are a number of states that have had CWD. Has there been a collapse of a deer herd in any of those states? A significant collapse of a deer herd in any of those states? And if so, tell me what states and where'd you get your information?
So I think the thing that we need to think about is the future, the longevity of a population. So what we said is this disease is chronic, and while we haven't seen them collapse, we have 1 million deer here. And so if you can keep the prevalence low, it's going to take a long time to see that effect. What you are seeing, though, in areas where there are higher prevalences, 50%, you have seen changes in the population itself in terms of the age structure of the animals out there on the landscape. You're going to see less older animals. You're going to see fewer of those larger bucks because they're not surviving as the prevalence increases.
Do you have some studies that show what you just stated?
Yeah, so I actually have the link for the Arkansas study. There's a YouTube video and you can watch it and you can see what they're talking about. I have that in my reference slide at the end. If you want, I can give it to you.
Okay. What is the difference between deer, which through their social structure exchange saliva very frequently, if not on a daily basis, at licking branches, around scrape sites, etc. And what study are you telling us is out there that's definitive that baiting causes CWD? I don't know of any such study.
I think the thing is what they're demonstrating.
And Dr. Kroll doesn't know of any such
What
study.
they're demonstrating is that the prion is present and we know that these animals are getting exposed. Just like we know that when you take animals that are not infected and you put them on a landscape in a contained, they did it in a controlled experience inside a fence, they knew prions were there, they depopped a herd, the prions were in the environment, they got exposed and the deer did contract CWD. What percentage
of the deer in those pastures contracted the disease?
Do you remember how many they tested on that? I would have to look it up. I don't know the exact number that actually enrolled positive out of the whole.
But it wasn't 100% is what I'm getting.
I don't know for sure.
With time.
This is a question for Gabe. Gabe, in the response plan and what y'all did, and what you told the commissioners in the meeting, didn't that plan also call for mandatory check stations? And to that point, why aren't you all doing check stations around the immediate area of that deer pen? Why are you putting the burden on the hunters to bring their animals to you instead of having check stations?
So we're not recommending check stations because Joe alluded to that, is we didn't feel we needed to put the burden on the hunters to make you come to us.
But doesn't it say in the plan that you did, that you were supposed to?
The regulation says that if to enact a mandatory check station, you have to bring it to us. So we did not enact CWD check stations.
So you ducked the issue?
No.
Yes, you did.
No,
Of course you did.
I
heard what you said. I think state it again.
So what I said was, in the plan, that it says if we enact mandatory CWD check stations, that hunters must bring those animals to us during those times. In this instance, we did not enact mandatory CWD check stations in these 3 counties.
Why?
So by default,
Why?
what it has to,
I understand that, but why didn't you do it?
And I just answered that by saying, we did not need to put the undue burden on our hunters to bring them because we can get the samples we need by working with our taxidermists and processors. So we are very confident that we can sample the region in 3 counties efficiently with working in all the different ways that we talked about and working with everybody here. We had to do that in West Kentucky because of the harvest and the infrastructure. All what Joe talked about on the why and why we did what we did. We are trying to find a balanced approach. And we don't want to put undue burden on our hunters if we don't have to. And that is what we felt in year 1, that we can get the samples we need without making those recommendations to make the hunters come to us. It's not needed for us.
All right, let me ask the audience a question. How many people here would go to a mandatory check station if it was to help the deer herd? Can I see a show of hands?
And we preach it, and you can come see us. We gave you all the locations where we'll be. We'll be glad to take those samples. We just don't want to force or mandate something that we do not feel is necessary. And I believe that is a very level-headed approach.
I have one more question. How much money has the department received by going into these CWZ zones? So for instance, Doc, in West Kentucky, how much money, federal money, has come in as a result of the baiting bans?
Yeah, I'd be happy to address that one because I've dealt with a lot of our finances over the years with grants and budgets and things like that. And I'm glad you did ask that question so that we can get it out in the open. It's actually quite the opposite. And there's been a lot of speculation going around that this is a cash cow for the department, and suddenly when you go CWD positive that now all this cash is rolling in. We will show you our books. It's quite the opposite. The cash is rolling out fast as we respond to CWD. Right now, we've received no extra grants. Ed asked this question at our 3rd district meeting last week, and I appreciated him asking that. And there are some grants available for CWD, and we've taken advantage of some smaller pots of money for some research. But if you know of grants, if you know of these pots of money that we could take advantage of, please tell me. We would love to access some of that money to help us with this response. That's just not the case. We're not receiving extra money. Right now, the way we're funding our CWD response is through Pittman-Robertson Wildlife Restoration dollars, unfortunately. That's what we use as we respond to this. As far as the check station question, which was another good point, that one actually really surprises me. We thought we were doing something good there for hunters to not overburden hunters by not mandating that you come to check stations, because in Dr. Floyd's area in West Kentucky, that's been a big complaint. A lot of folks don't like having to come to a mandatory check station. It overburdens them. So this time we took a different approach and tried the opposite. We thought we were doing something good for the hunters. I'm hearing something a little different in here, so that surprises me a little bit. So I'm glad you get that feedback. So,
is the difference though between Western Kentucky and here the harvest days?
Yeah, and Edwin just pointed out, there is a difference in West Kentucky and here, and that is what we've made that point several times. You know, in West Kentucky, we don't get the harvest. The harvest is much smaller. It requires us to set these check station up to get our hands on the samples. Here, we think we can get our samples in other ways because a lot of deer hit these processors and a lot of deer hit these taxidermists. And we're gonna have staff set up there. We're gonna have them there throughout gun season, collecting as many samples as we can get. So good questions though, appreciate that. I know we've had several folks waiting on this side of the room. I'm trying to bounce around and then we'll come all the way back over to here. So Dr. Hass, if you can have us a question ready over here next.
Okay.
We'll go here.
Yes, I mean, you guys are saying that it's very easily spread and all this, and I'm not disputing that. I'm not the doctors, but what was the means of remediation on this particular farm? Was all the animals harvested, or is the animal still there? Are we waiting to see if it's gonna spread more, or what's the situation? And why is the Department of Agriculture taking care of captive deer farms rather than the Department of Fish and Wildlife?
So I will address, so we are working with our federal partners to get this resolved. It's a process. You have to go through certain steps to get it done. It's governed under CFR, the Federal Register, the positive sites are. So we are working towards that way. It's not like you just go out there and do the thing. You give them options, like she said. There are several options. They've chosen to depopulate, and we should have that done in short order. But again, not just our decision,
Okay, depopulate, explain that. Was the entire herd taken out, and was there any treatment of the soils or anything like that?
So typically, there is remediation, some remediation. Depopulation means, yes, taking all the deer out. And it hasn't been done yet, but it will be.
Why not?
Didn't I just explain that it is a process and we're working with our federal partners and we have to get all our ducks in a row?
Yeah, I'm not trying to be disrespectful,
This
sir.
is a process. We're trying to go through the steps. And it takes some time. Every state that has this has taken time. So we're trying to get through this process. It will be done. But the remediation, yes, the facility will be C&D, clean and disinfected with chemicals that are supposedly effective against this prion. It was found in some other states that it probably was better not to do remediation on the soil because it spreads the prion more through dispersal when rain hits fresh dirt. So it's better to let it sit and try to go down than to try to move the dirt. You'd have to take 5 or 6 inches off and bury it somewhere, and that's a pretty expensive process. It's been tried in other states, and this was the best approach.
Yes, sir. Meanwhile, is the potential for that continuing to have a more negative effect through spreading?
If it's, again, as we are doing epidemiologic investigation to try to determine where this came from, whether it came from another transfer, whether it came from the wild in, whether it was spontaneous generation, which is another consideration, are all things that we're trying to sort out at this time. This disease takes years to develop, and it just takes a little time to get this through, to get to the end point, and we are working towards that.
One last question. Would it be a fair statement that the hunters that purchase license in the state of Kentucky should be able to vote on whether agricultural deer farms were allowed to operate in the state of Kentucky and put the entire herd at risk?
So, again, I work for the state of Kentucky. I promote and try to adhere to compliance of regulations and statutes as written. Those things are done at another level, a statutory level, that allows us to have farms at this point. And if the public doesn't want them, then get with your legislatures, and that's the process to take care of that side of it.
On the far side of the room, Dr. Hass, you have a question? Okay, go for it.
I have a two-part question. I'll start with the first one. When the commissioners actually voted in the plan, we'll go back to the point that it was stated it was all or none. And I specifically want to ask a question related to Part A of your CWD plan, which is response to detection of CWD within Kentucky, regardless of whether captive or free ranging. And in it, it says legislation and or emergency regulations may be enacted to implement appropriate disease surveillance and contamination measures. These can include, but are not limited to, expanding deer seizing and increasing bag limits, increasing allocation of deer management permits, mandatory deer check-in at designated location, the issuance of special permits for the harvest of deer by licensed hunters on areas described by Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife, the prohibition of deer and elk rehabilitation, prohibiting of deer feeding or baiting, which is what I'm getting to here shortly, the prohibition of carcass movement within the SD, and the implementation of necessary actions to secure captive cervid facilities. These actions are described in section B below. So in regards to that with baiting specifically, it was asked by the commission, can we enact parts of this? And they were told all or none. So my question is then, if they can't vote all or none, are they allowed to when they did vote all or none? Does that fall then to our state legislators who can control this if we want to complain? Or does it fall to the actual commission and they actually could vote on that?
So great question. So two parts. So that section A talks about all the different things that we may do and what that might look like, and is basically a guide to explain the actions that the agency could consider. And in requirements of those, that they would be emergency regulations enacted by the commission. And what's different in this case is now we have in regulation CWD's surveillance zone requirements. So it's referring to emergency regulations that would need to be put into place. We have regulations that are already in place that have been vetted through the commission and approved by the legislature. So at this point, we don't need emergency actions. All we have to do is determine a surveillance zone. And what that surveillance zone, once we get that blessing of a surveillance zone, these things immediately go into effect. And so, and that is in our, like I said, in our deer regulation, and it specifically talks about the transportation of entire carcasses, coming to a mandatory check station, if we have a check station, the removal of bait, the removal of rehabbing cervids. So they're already in place. But what that was referring to is if it was an emergency situation, and that was written before the regulations were actually enacted. So in this point, when we took it to the commission, it was truly an all or nothing thing because the regulation was in place. So we were asking for them to approve the establishment of a surveillance zone, and with that approval, the regulations that we had in the books would automatically kick in.
So is that saying that they vote in pretty much that you all can just do what you want? You can decide how you're going to implement it regardless of what it is?
No, not at all. So the regulations that were enacted were the ones that were already in place and approved and vetted. So it was a formal request to establish a surveillance zone in these three counties. And when that request was approved, then the regulations that were already on the books applied to those three counties.
Okay, folks, we're down to about 5 minutes, and we want to respect everybody's time. And
I had a two-part question. I'll go to my last question. When you do put a plan in place in this CWD plan, specifically, I was curious, do you all look at the economic impact of what this CD plan does? Specific to, and I'm going to use Breckinridge County as an example, we've got a median household income here of $35,000 a year. The three counties here are 1 million acres. That's how many counties are affected by this. Well, pretty much when you put a baiting ban in for people that are, let's say a mom and pop that have 200 acres and they rely on family income for the 200 acres they lease out, when they can't lease a farm to somebody who baits, do you think people are going to continue to lease the farms in this 3-county circle when they can go outside of that circle and find a farm that they can bait on? So when you all put these plans together, do you look at the whole or do you just look at a single component and say, yep, CWD, let's get rid of this? We don't really worry about those families that are losing out on the money and the income they've been gotten off this.
we absolutely look at that and consider that with every action that we make. And it's paramount. And so you're pointing out single things in a big discussion on economic impact. Also related would be the number of hunters that are coming into the area, the number of activities that go on, the license sales that come into effect. Not necessarily because of the bait or the no bait, because of chronic wasting disease. And ultimately, that is the bigger concern. Is the disease on the landscape or is it not? I would argue that CWD on the landscape has a far greater effect than whether you can bait or whether you cannot. And I think that ultimately is the question, and that we struggle with, and going back to why we tried to make the CWD surveillance zone as small as we could to not cause undue burden both to our hunters and financially, because when you are in a CWD zone, it can have a negative impact on the economics of that area, of all the different things that we're talking about, not just because of baiting.
All right, so we've had a hand up over here most of the night. We're going to take this question. It'll be our last one, but we will be around.
We played a game for 26 minutes, so we're gonna shorten the question and answer, play a game for 26 minutes. So how long time we hang, now we're gonna that question.
Well, we have a problem here.
We will stay around as long as you want to stay around.
Right, that's, so if you hear Ben, we'll stay around and we'll talk, and our staff will be up here as long as you want. But we also want to be timely and respectful of your time. And we said 2 hours, we'll give you 2 hours, and then we'll stick around and come chat with us as much as you would like afterwards.
There is a problem, and people are trying to pinpoint everything. What is it that we need to do to quit spreading it besides baiting, which we can do the crops to be able to continue on with this? And mainly, I'm wanting to kind of like know how to stop the spread once they're deceased. Like after you have killed your deer, how are we supposed to take care of the rest of the corpse?
You're talking about disposal?
Yes.
So with disposal, the easiest, darn it, okay, the access for it, basically burying it 4 feet or deeper is probably gonna be the easiest for someone. The other option is a landfill. Landfill that's gonna bury it for you. So there's 2 options for carcass disposal. I know, I said 4 feet and that's not easy. So landfill and they'll bury it for you. Otherwise, you've gotta find an incinerator that gets to 1,000 degrees Celsius, which is not in the state.
So we'll wrap that, and I'll go ahead and do that. If anybody... Well, like I said, we'll go ahead and wrap this, and we will upload the video of this tomorrow on our YouTube channel. So go to our fw.ky.gov and on our YouTube page. Be glad to do that. Thank you all for coming, for all your questions tonight. We really appreciate your attendance, and we'd be glad to come up and answer any of your questions. Safe travels, and thank you all tonight.